Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again, Manny, and today I would like to discuss the leadership environment in reference to the Remember the Titans movie. I would like to start off with a quote once more. I'm not going to have the slideshows this time, but with the quote, um, I would like to start off with a warrior ethos based off of the ethos that we use in the United States Army. This is mostly heard from the younger soldiers in our environment. They kind of told us to or teach us to memorize these things and live by these ethos. But I'd start off with I would always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit, and I will never leave a fallen comrade. It might sound cheesy to a lot of soldiers, most especially, but for other people, it means a lot, right? Leaders in the Army still abide by these ethos, and they probably don't even know that they're doing or following it. But I wanted to start off with it since I feel like these ethos closely relate to what is displayed in the movie. So with that being said, I would like to proceed with the agenda that we're going to have today. I will be discussing the core leadership styles of Coach Boone and Coach Yost. I will be then transitioning to a personal preference, or to my personal preference in the style that I would like to emulate based off of the movie. And I would also talk about the followership aspect in the movie based off of the scene of my choosing. And lastly, I would be talking about the organizational and cultural concerns and how the leaders affected the change in the team. Excuse me. So with that being said, I will go ahead and proceed with I would be discussing the core leadership styles of Coach Boone and Coach Yost. Let's start off with Coach Boone, who's Denzel Washington. Great actor, by the way. He was, I believe, also an authoritative leader based off of the situation that was currently happening regarding the conflict between the races in their town. He didn't have a choice. He was put in that position, put in the head coach, and was placed in that position with or without his pretty much choice, right? I noticed that he had to quickly assert his authority to maintain order in the team. He ensured that the other coaches understood his position as well, and he wouldn't budge, right? In the beginning parts of the movie, they were trying to see how he was going to react to certain situations, but he didn't budge at all. He was also very aware of his qualifications and capabilities. He was confident. He knew what was needed for them to progress and ensure that the team was ready to win. He was clear and concise with regards to setting his expectations to his assistant coaches, and he wants them to function as a team right off the bat. This was observed during the early stages of the movie when he was pretty much he pulled the Coach Yost to the side by the stairs. He spoke to him. He drew the line, and he said that he was gonna keep a close eye on the coaches, and he's gonna be watching them closely as far as how they act and how they progress in the team. He was also a very straightforward coach. He was straightforward to the other coaches, and he was straightforward to the other players. He was specific on how they were supposed to dress professionally before and after getting back from training. So just one of the examples on how he was very straightforward. And he was also very straightforward in letting the team know what he was expected of them during the training. Now, moving on to Coach Yost. I believe that he was more of a participative leader. Excuse me. I believe he was a bit more democratic than Coach Boone. There was a scene where Coach Boone was briefing his plan, and everybody wanted to boycott the school. He then chooses to stay and work under Coach Boone. Yeah, Coach Boone, and then stay with his players as well. His involvement in the process greatly affected the satisfaction and happiness of his players. With him being around, the players felt like they were more in control, and his presence gave the motivation to the players to work harder. He was also a very delegative leader. He trusted the skills of the players with their strengths and weaknesses, Um, Confidence in the skills of the talents of the players was displayed as well. There was a scene where he asked, I think his name was Petey, to switch with Allen, with because Allen was kind of falling behind in defending the player, so he chose Petey to do the job because he knew that he was going to do a better job, which led to them winning at the end of the game. His decision and the ability to recognize Petey's skills would prove valuable in helping them win that one particular game. Moving on to the leadership style. Yep, the leadership style that depicted the movie that I would want to emulate, and why. I think I'm going to closely relate this to my last discussion as well, or last presentation, which having that right balance. So having the balance between the different leadership styles. I believe that knowing what works in certain situations and certain subordinates would be paramount in finding the right balance with different leadership styles. Adapting and overcoming is a phrase we usually, or adapt and overcome is a phrase that we usually hear in my line of work. Being able to adjust depending on the situation at hand would be paramount as a leader, and to be able to accomplish the task and even exceed the standards at some points, regardless of what was put out. According to Kelly's fellowship description, though, the scene that I would describe best that would relate to this was, which was the critical thinker one. So I think creative in. So the scene that I chose for this one was when Coach Boone kind of forced the team to interact with each other and get to know each other. The scene where we had the teammates essentially force them to get to know each other. Coach Boone knew that because of what was happening in their environment, and he knew that this was going to be a challenge. I think this was an example of an appropriate interaction between the leader and the team, because Coach Boone knew that he needed to build the team cohesion. So that shows signs of critical thinking. So he was innovative with regards to that, and he was pretty creative because he knew that this was going to be a challenge. And it felt like he came up with the plan on the fly. He needed to take them out of their comfort zones, and he hopefully was hopeful that this was going to strengthen their bonds and then strengthen the team itself, which will then make them a contender in the world of football. Moving on to the question of what were some of the organizational cultural concerns the leaders have to address to move the organization toward the leader of desired change. And how did we think Coach Boone and Coach Yost's leadership styles contributed or hindered in the desired change? The timing of Coach Boone's being the head coach of the team was a very challenging time. The conflict between the different races, and obviously all that time high, he got stuck managing the team that consisted of the different races as well. Coach Boone knew that for him to address these issues, he needed to have a tough conversations with his fellow coaches, as well as having the conversations with his players. He needed to find a way for each of the teammates to connect, taking them out of their comfort zones and forcing them to interact with each other and get to know each other. Through this, the team started to realize that color was not going to be an issue or a factor. They realized that they were all human with strengths and weaknesses, and to reach their goal of winning, they all realized that they had to work together. I observed that initially there was a good cop, bad cop situation with the two, between Coach Boone and Coach Yost. Coach Boone was definitely a stern leader, and Coach Yost was more of one of the carrying of the two leaders. Coach Yost being more of the good cop, I think it hindered the growth of the team because he was more focused on the white players versus the black players. This was a bit inevitable because he has been coaching these white players longer than the other colored players. This was a bit more of a challenge for him as well, because he felt like he raised these kids and he was a little bit more attached versus the other ones. Coach Boone, however, did not have that luxury. He had to make sure that he was fair and stern with everybody, regardless of their skin color. And he was just focused on the goal, which was to win as a team, which ended up happening anyways. All in all, a great movie. I think both of them had their strengths and weaknesses as well. But that concludes my presentation. I hope that was good. And pending any questions, that is my presentation. Have a good night.